You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 118. Provoked by a rankling antipathy, uncle and cousin plot the ruin of an innocent maid. Alarmed by riddling utterances, wife and concubine remonstrate with their idiot master. Lady Xing and Lady Wang judged from Yusher's words that the situation was irretrievable. If our niece wishes to become a nun, said Lady Wang, in a tone of resignation, then it must have been decreed in some earlier life. This is evidently her karma, and there is nothing we can do to prevent it. But nonetheless, it would look very bad for a girl from a family such as ours to enter a nunnery. That really is unthinkable. She turned to Xichen. Your sister-in-law has given you her permission, and we can only lend our approval to hers. But I must ask you not to shave your head. What matters is your state of mind, not your hairstyle. After all, Adamantina never shaved hers. Talking of which, I simply cannot understand that dreadful business. How could she have succumbed to temptation so easily? Anyway, if your mind is really and truly made up, then we shall simply have to consider your present apartment your hermitage. Your maids and servants had better be sent for, and we can give them a choice. Those who wish to stay on with you can do so, and will find husbands for the others. Xichen stopped crying at last, and bowed gratefully to Ladies Xing and Wang, Li Wan, Yusher, and the others present. Lady Wang now addressed Landscape and Xichen's other maids. Which of you wishes to enter the religious life with your mistress? We will do whatever you command, ma'am, was their response. Lady Wang could tell that they were none of them genuinely willing, and tried to think who else would be suitable to wait on Xichen in her new life. Aroma was standing behind Bao Yu, fully expecting this decision of Xichen's to move him to tears and provoke one of his fits, but to her surprise and considerable distress, he merely sighed with admiration and exclaimed, "What a rare resolve!" Bao Chai made no comment. But she was constantly on the lookout for telltale signs to help her gauge her husband's innermost feelings and intentions, and could not help but weep at this further evidence, so she thought, of his deluded mind. Lady Wang was about to summon all the other maids and question them, when Nightingale suddenly came forward and fell to her knees. Have you decided yet, ma'am, who would be most suitable to wait on Miss Xichen? I have no intention of forcing anyone, replied Lady Wang. Whoever is willing must speak up. Miss Xichen has chosen a religious life, said Nightingale. But none of her maids, or so it seems, shares this aspiration of hers. I have something I should like to say, ma'am. It's not that I wish Miss Xichen to be parted from her maids. But aspirations differ. I served Miss Lin for a long time, and as you know, ma'am, she treated me with a kindness that I shall never be able to repay. When she died, my one wish was to follow her to the grave, but because she was not a member of this family, and because I also owe so much to all of you, it was hard for me to take that step. Now that Miss Xichen wishes to become a nun, I beg your ladyships to let me go with her, and devote the rest of my days to serving her. If your ladyships will only grant me this wish, my life will not have been in vain. When Nightingale had finished speaking, and before either Lady Xing or Lady Wang could reply, Bao Yu, who at the initial mention of Dai Yu's name had begun to show ominous signs of being distressed and tearful, suddenly gave a loud laugh and came forward. I have no business saying this, I know, but since you were so good as to send Nightingale to work in my apartment, Mother, I hope you will forgive me for speaking my mind. Please grant her this request, and allow her to carry out this fine resolution of hers. If it were any of your other cousins leaving home to get married, replied Lady Wang, you would be crying your heart out. But now, when Xichen says she wants to leave home and become a nun, so far from trying to dissuade her, you actually praise her for it. I'm afraid I completely fail to understand what's going on in your mind. First let me know whether this matter is settled, said Bao Yu. Has Xichen definitely made up her mind? And has she definitely received your permission? If so, if it is real, then there is something further I should like to tell you, Mother. But if it is still not settled, I shall keep what I know to myself. What a peculiar way to talk, exclaimed Xichen. If I were not in earnest, do you honestly think I would have been able to convince my aunts? I feel the same way as Nightingale. If they will let me do as I wish, I shall count myself blessed. If they will not, I should rather die than continue living my present life. So, there's nothing to fear. Whatever you have to say, just go ahead and say it. If I do tell you this, it's hardly divulging a secret, said Bao Yu, since it refers to something already predestined. I want you all to listen while I recite a poem. Honestly, they chided him. At a moment like this, with real people really suffering, all you can think about is poetry. It's sickening. It's not something of my own. It's a poem I once saw somewhere. I'd like you to listen to it. Oh, very well. Hurry up then. Enough of your prattling. Bao Yu did not try to explain himself any further, but began to recite. When you see through the spring scene's transient state, a nun's black habit shall replace your own. Alas, that daughter of so great a house, by Buddha's altar lamp should sleep alone. Li Wan and Bao Chai both cried out in alarm. Lord save us. He's bewitched. Lady Wang shook her head and sighed. Bao Yu, where on earth did you see this poem? Bao Yu was reluctant to say any more, and replied. Please don't ask, mother. Just take my word for it. As the meaning of the poem gradually sank in, Lady Wang began sobbing again. You said you were joking the other day, when you talked of becoming a monk yourself. And now this poem all of a sudden. Enough. I understand. What am I to do? There is nothing I can do, but let you go your own ways. If only you could have waited till I was dead and gone. Then you could all have done as you pleased. Bao Chai tried to console her, but was in no fit state to do so. The pain she herself felt was like a knife wound piercing her heart, and eventually she broke down and burst into tears. Aroma was faint with weeping, and had to be supported by Ripple. Bao Yu did not shed a single tear, nor did he try to offer them any solace. He maintained a total silence. Jia Lan and Jia Huan had already left, and it fell to Li Wan to do what she could to save the situation. I'm sure it's simply that Bao Yu is too upset by this decision of Shi Chun's to know what he is saying. We should not take it seriously. Nightingale must receive an answer, though. We must let her stand up. Is she to be granted her request or not? What difference does it make? Replied Lady Wang. Her mind is clearly made up in any case, and when a person's mind is made up there's no stopping them. No doubt Bao Yu will tell us that this decision of Nightingale's is predestined too. Nightingale kowtowed, and Shi Chun thanked Lady Wang. Nightingale also kowtowed to Bao Yu and Bao Chai. Amida Buddha, exclaimed Bao Yu piously. How noble! How rare! I never thought that you would be the first of us to be saved. Bao Chai's self-control failed her again, and Aroma, heedless of Lady Wang's presence, burst out sobbing and cried. I want to go with Miss Shi Chun too, and spend the rest of my life in prayer. Bao Yu smiled. Yours is also a fine aspiration. But alas, a life of seclusion has not been decreed you by fate. Then I would rather die, sobbed Aroma. Despite his newfound detachment, Bao Yu could not help being moved by this declaration. But he said nothing. It was already 3 o'clock in the morning, and he suggested to his mother that she should retire for the night. Li Wan went back to her apartment, and Landscape escorted Shi Chun to her room, where she continued to wait on her for the time being. Husbands were eventually found for each of Shi Chun's maids, and Nightingale spent the rest of her days faithfully serving her. But we anticipate. Jia Zheng, meanwhile, was on his way south with grandmother Jia's coffin, and had run into an army convoy returning to the capital after the victorious completion of a campaign. The canal was hopelessly congested with military transport boats, and the delay made Jiazheng extremely fretful. His one consolation was an encounter with an official from the Coastal Defense Yamen, who informed him that the commandant, Tan Chun's father-in-law, had been recalled to the capital. Tan Chun would now be able to visit home, although there was no indication when she would be traveling. Another consequence of the delay was that Jiaxing found himself running short of cash. He was obliged to write a letter and have it delivered to the yamen of Steward Lai's son, Lai Shangrong, who happened to be a mandarin in the vicinity, asking him for a loan of 500 silver taels. The servant entrusted with this mission was told to bring the money and overtake Jiaxing further along the canal. A few days and a dozen or so li later, the servant reappeared and came on board the boat with Lai Shangrong's reply. The letter was full of tales of woe of one sort or another, and enclosed 50 taels of silver. Jiaxing was furious, and without a moment's hesitation ordered the servant to return. "Take him back his money this instant. And he can have his letter too. Tell him not to bother." The poor servant did as he was ordered and returned to Lai's yamen. Lai, perturbed at having both his letter and his paltry offering returned, and knowing that he had behaved meanly, made up another package, this time enclosing an additional 100 taels, and begged the servant to take it back with him to Jiaxing. But despite Lai's pleas and blandishments, the man absolutely refused, and returned to the boat empty-handed. Lai Shangrong was most apprehensive about the consequences of this episode, and immediately wrote to his father at Ronghua House, advising him to take some leave, and if possible to buy his way out of service. When Steward Lai received his son's letter, he asked Jia Chong and Jia Yun to plead with Lady Wang for his release. Jia Chong knew quite well that it would be futile even to try. He let a day go by, and then gave a false report that Lady Wang had refused his request. So Lai took a few days' leave, and meanwhile sent a messenger to his son's yamen, advising him also to plead sick and relinquish his official post. Lady Wang knew nothing whatsoever about all these goings-on. Jia Yun was most disappointed to hear Jia Chong turn down Lai's request. The commission it might have brought, had seemed his last chance of recouping the enormous gambling losses he had incurred over the past several days. His only other hope was to apply to Jia Huan for a loan. But Jia Huan was in no position to act as his creditor, having himself never had a penny of his own, and having already squandered his mother's savings. If Yun failed to raise a loan, he did however succeed in stirring Jia Huan to fresh thoughts of revenge. Memories of Shifeng's cruelty still rankled in Jia Huan's mind, and with Jiao Yan away, he was more than ready to vent some of his spleen on Qiaojie. The loan-seeking Jia Yun seemed an ideal accomplice. "You're not a boy any longer, Yun," he grumbled provocatively. "Why come asking for a loan from a pauper like me when there's a chance of making a nice little profit?" "Tell us another," replied Yun. "We've just been having a bit of a lark. I never saw any chances for profit passing us by. What was that a day or two ago about a Mongol prince wanting to buy himself a concubine? Why not talk it over with Dumbo and offer the prince Qiaojie?" "This may make you cross when I say it, Uncle Huan," replied Jia Yun. "But I'd better say it all the same. Supposing the prince did buy a concubine from our family, he'd probably never want anything more to do with us afterwards." In response to this, Jia Huan whispered something in Jia Yun's ear, and Yun nodded casually, judging the proposal to be a passing whim of Huan's and not worthy of serious consideration. At that very moment Wang Ren happened along. "What are you two plotting?" he asked. "Trying to keep me in the dark, are you?" Jia Yun communicated to him, sotto voce, the substance of Jia Huan's scheme, and Wang Ren clapped his hands enthusiastically. "Bravo! A capital idea. Lucrative too. But can you really pull it off? If you've the guts to go through with it, I'll back you up. Don't forget I'm her uncle. It's my decision, after all. You just put the plan to Lady Xing, Huan, old chap, while I have a word with Dumbo. If the ants start asking questions, we must be sure to back each other up with the same story." When this conference was over, Wang Ren went to find Dumbo, while Jia Yun went to impart the good news to Ladies Xing and Wang, adding many an enticing embellishment. Lady Wang made a note of the proposal, but was somewhat skeptical. Lady Xing, on the other hand, when she heard that her brother knew, seemed in favor of the idea, and sent for Dumbo to supply her with more details. Dumbo had already been briefed by Wang Ren, and had needless to say been offered his cut in the profits from the enterprise, and therefore when summoned to his sister's apartment he knew what to say. This prince is a very important man. Of course, what you're being asked to consent to is not for her to become a proper wife exactly, but as soon as she goes to him I can guarantee that brother-in-law will get his job back and the family as a whole recover a bit of its old pull. Lady Xing had no real mind of her own. She was taken in by Dumbo's story and invited Wang Ren to come and talk the matter over with her. Wang Ren's enthusiastic support for the project finally swayed the balance. She communicated her consent to Jia Yun, while Wang Ren went ahead at once and sent word to the prince's palace. The prince for his part was unaware of all this behind-the-scenes activity. He was merely planning to dispatch some of his ladies to examine the girl's physiognomy and suitability to enter his harem. Jia Yun managed to have a word with the ladies in private beforehand. None of the girl's own family know the truth about this. So far as they are concerned, the prince is thinking of taking the girl as one of his wives. Once she is installed, everything will be all right, have no fear. Her grandmother has given her consent and her uncle Wang Ren is acting as go-between. The ladies agreed to cooperate. Jia Yun went to give Lady Xing the latest news and informed Lady Wang of the match. Li Wan and Bao Chai had no inkling of the truth and received the news of the princely wedding with pleasure. On the day appointed, several splendidly attired palace ladies arrived and were received and entertained for a while by Lady Xing. They were soon aware that the lady with whom they were dealing was of considerable rank and were most respectful towards her. As the terms of the transaction had not been finally agreed upon, Lady Xing had said nothing to Qiao Jie, but had merely informed her that some relatives had come to call and asked her to go out and see them. Qiao Jie, who was little more than a child and too young to suspect anything, went with her old nanny and Patience, who felt a little uneasy and insisted on accompanying her charge. The minute Qiao Jie entered the room, the two palace ladies began subjecting her to a penetrating scrutiny, ogling her entire person, top to toe. They then rose to their feet, took her by the hand and looked her over once more, after which they sat down again for a few minutes and then left. Qiao Jie was most embarrassed by all this staring, and when she returned to her room she sat puzzling it over to herself. She could not recall ever having seen these relatives before, and said as much to Patience, who for her part, as soon as she had seen the way the two women were carrying on, had guessed the truth. They're obviously examining her with a view to marriage, she thought to herself. But with Mr. Lian away from home, the responsibility for this rests with Lady Xing, and I've no idea which family is involved. A family of the same rank as ours would never go in for all this staring. Anyway, those women didn't look as if they came from one of the royal princely establishments. There was something rather outlandish about them. I'd better not say anything to Qiao Jie for the present, but wait until I know more myself. Patience set about discovering the truth of the matter, and since the maids and serving women concerned had all worked under her at one time or another in the past, they were well disposed and immediately gave her the information she wanted. She was horrified and racked her brains for some means of averting this catastrophe. She still thought it wiser to say nothing to Qiao Jie, but hurried over to inform Li Wan and Bao Chai, begging them to lay the matter before Lady Wang. Lady Wang herself had already sensed that there was something amiss and had said as much to Lady Xing. But Lady Xing was quite taken in by her brother and Wang Ren, and instead of paying any heed to Lady Wang's words, rather suspected some ulterior motive in her opposition to the scheme. The girl is of age, she replied. With Lian away from home, the decision in this matter is mine. And besides, my brother and the girl's own uncle have both looked into it thoroughly. Surely they know the truth. I am very much in favor of the idea. And you needn't worry, if anything should go wrong, Lian and I are not going to start laying the blame at your door. Lady Wang made some perfunctory reply, but was secretly furious with Lady Xing. She took her leave and went back to tell Bao Chai what had been decided. She wept as she spoke, and Bao Yu tried to console her. Mother, don't distress yourself. Nothing will come of this scheme. Whatever happens is already written in Qiao Jie's destiny anyway, so please don't try to interfere. Don't be such an idiot, exclaimed Lady Wang. Once they've agreed to this match, they'll be here any day to fetch her away. Patience is right, your cousin Lien will blame me for this when he comes back. I would want the best for any member of the family, and especially for Xiaojia, for her parents' sake. Think of the other girls. We arranged Xiaoyan's marriage to your cousin Ko, and now look how happy they are together. And the Mei family into which Bao Qin has married are by all accounts very comfortably off, so there's no need to worry about her. Xiang Yun, I know, has not been quite so fortunate. That match was her own uncle's idea in the first place, and it would have turned out well if her husband had not fallen ill of a consumption and died. Now the poor girl has vowed to spend the rest of her days a widow. If Xiaojia falls into bad hands, I shall never forgive myself. As she was speaking, Patience came in to consult with Bao Chai, and also to learn the results of Lady Wang's meeting with Lady Xing. Lady Wang told her what Lady Xing had said. After a thoughtful silence, Patience fell to her knees. Xiaojia's whole future now depends on you, ma'am, she pleaded. If we deliver her into the hands of those people, it will mean a lifetime of suffering for her. And what do you think Mr. Lien will say when he comes home? You are an intelligent girl, said Lady Wang. Stand up now and listen to what I have to say. In the last resort, Xiaojia is my sister-in-law's granddaughter, not mine. If Lady Xing wants to take a decision, how can I stand in her way? There is really no cause for concern, insisted Bao Yu. The important thing is to have a clear perception of destiny. Patience was afraid that Bao Yu would start raving again and commit some indiscretion, and she remained silent. She had said all that she wanted to say to Lady Wang, and now returned to her own apartment. Lady Wang's mental distress had brought on a pain in her heart. She summoned a maid to assist her, and leaning heavily on her arm struggled back to her own room and lay down. She did not ask Bao Yu and Bao Chai to accompany her, saying that she would feel better after a sleep. But she found it impossible to shake off her troubled mood, and later when she heard that old Mrs. Li had called, could not bring herself to rise from her bed and entertain her. Then Jia Lan came in to pay his respects and to deliver a message. A letter has come from grandfather. The boys at the gate have brought it in. Mother was going to give it to you, but as my grandmother Li has just come, she asked me to bring it instead. Mother will be coming over shortly to talk to you, and bringing my grandmother Li. He handed Lady Wang the letter. Lady Wang asked him, as she took it from him. Why is your grandmother here? I don't know myself, replied Lan. I just heard say that there's a letter from cousin Qi's fiancé's family, the Zhens. Lady Wang knew that Li Qi had been promised to Jin Bao Yu, and that the betrothal had already been sealed with the customary gift of tea. It must be that the Zhens wanted to proceed with the wedding, and old Mrs. Li had come to discuss some last-minute details. She nodded and opened the letter from Jiazheng. The canal is congested with boats bringing back the army from its successful campaign on the coast, and my progress has thereby been greatly delayed. I have heard that Tan Chun's husband is traveling to the capital with his father, and wonder if you have heard anything from them? A day or two ago I had a letter from Lien, telling me of Brother Shi's illness. Is there any more news? The time is drawing near for Bao Yu and Lan to sit their examinations. They must study diligently, and on no account must they be allowed to fritter their time away. It will be a few days before I can reach Nanking with Mother's coffin. I am in good health, so don't worry about me. Please pass on my instructions to Bao Yu and Lan. Zheng. Dated the __day of the __month. P.S. Rong will be writing separately. After reading the letter, Lady Wang handed it back to Jia Lan, saying, Give this to Bao Yu and tell him to read it. And then give it back to your mother. While she was speaking, Li Wan and old Mrs. Li came in and paid their respects. They seated themselves, and old Mrs. Li spoke about the Zhens and Li Qi's wedding. They discussed this for a while, and then Li Wan asked Lady Wang. Have you read father's letter? I have. Jia Lan handed the letter to his mother, who read it herself and said. Tanchun has been away for over a year, and not once come home. It will be such a relief for you now that they are moving up to the capital. Yes, replied Lady Wang. I was in some pain just now, but this piece of news has made me feel much more comfortable. We still don't know when they'll be arriving, mind you. Old Mrs. Li asked how Jia Zheng's journey had been, while Li Wan turned to Jia Lan and said, I hope you have taken note of what your grandfather says in his letter. The examination is drawing closer, and he is very concerned about you both. You'd better hurry and take the letter for Bao Yu to read. Please tell me, inquired old Mrs. Li, how it is that the two of them can take the second examination without having acquired their first degree. Lady Wang explained. Before he set out on his posting as grain intendant, my husband arranged for the purchase of the licentiate degree for the two of them. Old Mrs. Li nodded, and Jia Lan went off with the letter to find Bao Yu. Having taken his leave of Lady Wang earlier, Bao Yu had returned to his apartment, where he picked up his copy of the Autumn Floods chapter from Zhuangzi, and began reading it with fascination. When Bao Chai came out from the inner room, and saw him so totally absorbed in his reading, she wandered across and glanced at the book's title. It disappointed her greatly that it should be a Taoist classic. Still, the only thing he takes seriously is nonsense like this about quitting the world and rising above the mortal plane, she reflected to herself. He's truly a hopeless case. It seemed futile to remonstrate with him, so she just sat by his side, gazing at him reproachfully. Observing her expression, Bao Yu asked, What's all this about, then? Since we are husband and wife, she replied, I should be able to look to you for lifelong support. Our life together should be built on something more than the passion of a moment. Glory and wealth are as insubstantial as a cloud, that I can understand. But since ancient times, what the sages have prized most has always been virtue, not. Before he had heard her out, Bao Yu put his book down, smiled and said, You talk of virtue and the sages of ancient times. But do you know that the sages also held up as an ideal the heart of a newborn child? What virtues has the newborn child? None, only a complete absence of knowledge, of consciousness, of greed, of envy. All our lives we sink deeper and deeper into the quagmire of greed, hatred, folly and passion. The great question is, how to rise above all this, how to escape the net of this mortal life. This floating life, with its meetings and partings, I can see now why in all the ages since it was first uttered the true meaning of this expression has never been fully grasped. As for your virtue, who has ever attained the true pristine state of virtue? What the ancients meant by the heart of a newborn child, retorted Bao Chai, was a heart full of loyalty and filial devotion, not this mystical, escapist notion of yours. The emperors Yao, Shun, Yu, Tang, the Duke of Zhou, Confucius, they all spent their lives improving the lot of mankind. Their heart of a newborn child was simply their spirit of compassion and concern for others. Whereas yours, it would seem, leaves you so blissfully unconcerned that you would be willing to forsake your own family. It doesn't make any sense to me. Bao Yu nodded and smiled. Yao and Shun were not able to prevail upon Chaofu or Su Yu to abandon their mountain retreats, nor could King Wu or the Duke of Zhou induce Bo Yi and his brother Shu Qi to involve themselves in the world. You are becoming more and more absurd, interrupted Bao Chai. If all the men of old had been hermits like those four you mention, then there would never have been sages like Yao, Shun, the Duke of Zhou, and Confucius. And besides, it's ridiculous to compare yourself with Bo Yi. Both he and Shu Qi lived in the declining years of the Shang dynasty, and their lives were beset with difficulties of one kind or another. So they had a good pretext for escaping their responsibilities. But your case is totally different. Ours is a golden age, and we ourselves have received numerous favors from the throne, while our ancestors enjoyed lives of luxury. And you yourself have been treasured all your life, both by our late grandmother, and by mother and father. Reflect a little on what you said just now. Don't you think that I'm right? Bao Yu listened in silence. His only response was to stare at the ceiling and smile. Since you're stuck for an answer, Bao Chai continued, you should listen to my advice. Pull yourself together from now on, and work as hard as you can. Do well in the examination, and even if you never achieve anything else in your entire life, that will at least be some return for heaven's favor, and for your ancestors' virtue. Bao Yu nodded and heaved a sigh. Doing well in the examination is not that difficult. And what you say about never achieving anything else, and making some return for heaven's favor and our ancestors' virtue is very much to the point. Before Bao Chai could reply to this, Aroma put in her word. I didn't really understand what Mrs. Bao was saying about the sages of old. All I know is that we've all stuck with you through thick and thin since we were children, tending you with more devotion than I can say. Of course, I know that's only as it should be, but shouldn't you show us a little consideration in return? And look at the devotion Mrs. Bao has shown to the master and her ladyship, all for your sake. Even if you don't set great store by your marriage, surely you owe her a simple debt of gratitude for what she has done? As for all that stuff about immortality, that's just a lot of hot air. Whoever actually saw an immortal set foot in this world of ours? Some monk turns up from goodness knows where, talking a lot of rubbish, and you go and take him seriously. You're an educated man, surely you don't give more weight to his words than you do to the masters and her ladyships? Bao Yu bowed his head in silence. Aroma had more ammunition ready, but just then footsteps were heard outside, and a voice came through the window. Is Uncle Bao at home? Bao Yu recognized Jia Lan's voice, stood up and said pleasantly. Come in. Jia Lan entered, his face wreathed in smiles. He paid his respects to Bao Yu and Bao Chai, and exchanged greetings with Aroma, before presenting Bao Yu with Jia Zheng's letter, which Bao Yu took from him and read. So my sister is coming back to town, then? Judging from the letter it seems more than likely, was Jia Lan's reply. Bao Yu nodded his head in thoughtful silence, and Jia Lan continued. You see at the end of the letter, Uncle Bao, grandfather urges us to get down to some serious work. I don't suppose you've been doing many compositions recently, have you? Bao Yu laughed. I'd like to do a few, just to keep my hand in. Why not? May as well pull the wool over their eyes. In that case, suggested Jia Lan, why don't you propose a few themes, and we'll write them together? That will help us prepare for the exam. I certainly don't want to hand in a blank sheet, and make a fool of us both. I know you will do nothing of the kind, said Bao Yu. Bao Chai asked Jia Lan to take a seat. Bao Yu sat down again himself in his original chair, while Jia Lan perched politely nearby, and they chatted for a while about their compositions, their conversation becoming quite animated. Bao Chai, seeing the two of them thus engrossed, discreetly withdrew, thinking to herself. It almost seems as if Bao Yu may have seen the light. But I wonder what he meant just now by picking on my words never achieving anything else and repeating them so emphatically? She was still greatly puzzled. Aroma on the other hand was delighted to hear him talking about compositions and the examination. Praise be to Buddha, she exclaimed silently to herself. What a sermon it took though, to bring him to his senses. The boys continued their discussion, and Oriol made them some tea. Jia Lan rose to his feet to receive his cup, and talked a little longer about the regulations governing the examination, adding that he would also like to invite Jin Bao Yu over one day. Bao Yu seemed willing that he should do so. After a while, Jia Lan returned to his apartment, leaving Jia Zheng's letter behind with Bao Yu. Bao Yu read it through again, and with a smile on his lips went in and handed it to Musk to put away. Then he returned and removed his copy of Zhuangzi from the table, collecting up at the same time some of his other favorite esoteric books, a collection that included the Hermetic Clavicule, The Secret of the Primordial Flower, and the Compendium of the Five Lamps. He gave instructions to Musk, Ripple and Oriole to store all of these away. Bao Chai was amazed to see him do this, and wished to sound out his true motives. It's very commendable of you to forego reading such books, she said with a quizzical smile. But why do you have to move them out of sight altogether? Because now I understand, replied Bao Yu. None of those books is worth anything. It would be best to burn the lot, and be rid of them once and for all. Bao Chai was delighted to hear him saying this. But the very next minute she heard him recite, as if to himself. True Buddha mind within is not in sutras to be found. Beyond the crucible, there leads a path to higher ground. Bao Chai did not catch every word, but Buddha mind within and higher ground were enough to fill her once more with gloomy forebodings. She watched him anxiously. He told the maids to prepare a quiet room for him, looked out all his old copies of books like Zisius's Neo-Confucian Primer, and collections of examination essays and verses, and assembled them all in his new room. Then he sat down in earnest and began quietly working. Bao Chai felt she could finally set her mind at rest. Aroma could hardly believe the evidence of her eyes and ears. She smiled conspiratorially at Bao Chai. You certainly know how to talk him round, ma'am. Just that one lecture from you and he's a new man. I only hope he hasn't left it too late. The exams are looming very close. Bao Chai nodded and smiled. These things are in the hands of fate. His success will not turn on how soon or late he begins preparing. I just hope that from now on he will learn to be more adult, and give up his old antics. Checking first that she and Aroma were alone in the room, she added in an undertone. I'm certainly very pleased at this change of heart. But there is still one thing that worries me. His old weakness. We ought to try to isolate him from our own sex. You are quite right, ma'am, said Aroma. So long as he was under the influence of that monk, he seemed to be quite indifferent to the girls around him. But now that he's changed course again, we must once more be on our guard for a revival of his old habits. I don't think he's likely to show much interest in either of us, ma'am. With Nightingale gone, that only leaves the 4 other maids. Fivey is the little vixen among them, but I hear that her mother has been asking for permission to take her out of service to get married, so she'll be leaving in a few days' time. Musk and Ripple have never been particularly close to Master Bao, but we shouldn't forget that they used to fool about with him when he was a child. That leaves Oriole. He doesn't seem at all interested in her, and she's a very dependable girl. I suggest that for day-to-day duties, like pouring tea and carrying water, Oriole should take charge, with a few of the junior maids to help her. What do you think, ma'am? I have been worrying about the same thing myself, replied Bao Chai. Your proposal is a very sensible one. So from then on Oriole was put in charge. Bao Yu never left his room now. Every day he sent someone else to pay respects to his mother on his behalf. Lady Wang's delight at this new regime of his needs no description. When the 3rd of the 8th came round, Grandmother Jia's birthday, Bao Yu went early in the morning to kowtow at her shrine, and then returned to his quiet room. After breakfast, Bao Chai, Aroma, and some of the maids had gone to sit in the front room, and were chatting with Ladies Xing and Wang, and he was sitting alone in his room, deep in concentration, when Oriole came in with a tray of sweetmeats. Her ladyship asked me to bring these for you, she said. They are offerings left over from her old ladyship's sacrifice. Bao Yu rose to his feet to thank her, and then sat down again. Put them over there, he said. As she placed the tray to one side, Oriole said to him in an undertone. Her ladyship has been speaking very highly of you in the front room. Bao Yu smiled. Oriole continued. She said that now you are studying so hard, you are sure to pass your exam, and then if you go on and become a palace graduate and an official, your parents' hopes for you will not have been in vain. Oriole suddenly remembered what Bao Yu had once said to her, the day she had knotted tassels for him. I hope you do pass, she went on animatedly. It will be such a blessing for our mistress. Remember what you said that day in the garden, when you asked me to knot you a plum blossom tassel? You wondered what lucky household the mistress would take me to when she married? Well, you were the lucky one after all. There was something about what she said, and the way she said it that aroused in Bao Yu once more an old, and all too human emotion. But the nostalgia soon passed. he composed himself again, and said with a gentle smile. So according to you, I am lucky, and so is your mistress. But how do you feel about it? Oriole flushed at once, and forced a smile. We're just maids. Being lucky or not doesn't really enter into it for us. Bao Yu smiled again. As a matter of fact, even if you did spend your whole life as a maid, you might turn out to have been luckier than either of us. This sounded to Oriole like more of his foolishness. She was afraid of being responsible for another of his scenes, and deemed it prudent to leave, but before she could do so, Bao Yu laughed. Silly girl. Let me tell you something. If you want to know what it was, you must turn to the next chapter.